And thank you for coming out here today, and welcome to those who are watching on YouTube. It's great to have you join us as well. And if you are ever in this area, please stop by and be a part of one of our services. I promise you that we will do our best to make you feel right at home. We got so many ways, you're bound to like some of them. Excuse me. The title of my talk today is Who Are the Poor? I started to say graduated. I retired from GE in 2007 after a 35-plus year career. And in January of 2008, Ann and I went on a great expedition. We first went to Hawaii for a few days to acclimate, and then we went to a small atoll in the middle of the Pacific known as Christmas Island. And Christmas Island got its name. Our very own Captain Cook, the guy we have the statue of downtown, discovered that island on Christmas, and therefore became Christmas Island. Was uninhabited at that time, but later on, some big companies brought in some natives from the Gilbert Islands, the Gilbertese people, and they started, I think there was a banana plantation and some coconut harvesting. What it's known for today is in the center of this island, there's big open flats, and it is fly fishing for bonefish. They're known as the ghost of the flats, and it's quite a thing to hook up with a bonefish when you're out fly fishing. We landed at Christmas Island, and I felt at home right away. Here was this giant 5,000-foot runway, just like we have in Alaska, World War II runway. And we taxied over to the terminal. We're actually in the kingdom of Kiribati. We taxied over to the terminal, which consisted of 4 or 5 Quonset huts linked together. And there was a sign out front. It was an old piece of plywood that had been painted over with white, and then in black letters had written, "Welcome to Christmas Island." And you could see the sign creator didn't plan sufficiently ahead, so he was running out of room as he got to the end, so the Christmas Island was getting smaller and smaller as you got to the end. So it felt a lot like Alaska, other than the temperature. But once we got through customs, we met our guide and outfitter. I think we kind of stood out, and he didn't have any trouble identifying us, and we loaded in the back of his pickup truck and he bounced most of the way around the island to our lodge, which was a cinder block little structure. But as we drove, I was struck by the poverty of these people. They were living in little huts made of grass or straw, just woven together. And they didn't even have any windows. They just kind of had these little openings, I guess, to see out. And you could look in and see, and they didn't even have dirt floors. They just had sand floors. And they had nothing. There were no cars. Because there's no employment. There was no economy at all. I think the only economy were a couple of these fishing lodges that were taking guys like me out to go fly fish. And I felt that compassion. I felt so much compassion for these poor people that had nothing. And finally we saw a few of these little huts had kind of tin roofs. They were corrugated, taken, from the military, the Quonset hut things, and they had those for roofs, and thought, well, at least they have something. There once we got to our lodge, we were explained how we're to behave and what we're supposed to do. And boy, every morning at 7 o'clock, you're on the beach because you take off at 7:01 to go out to all these flats and you fish all day. You don't get back until 5 or 5:30. You make your own lunch in the morning before you leave, and that's all you have. Some of these trips were fairly lengthy to get out there, and we got to know our guides fairly well and kind of got talking to them. And I asked them about, their living quarters and whatnot, and I was kind of surprised. Those little holes where there wasn't any grass and no windows, those were very strategically placed. They knew exactly where the island breezes would go through to cool the things off. And the ones that had the corrugated metal roofs, those were the poor people. Yes, it kept them dry, but it also kept all the heat in. The ones with the grass roofs, the heat would go up and it would escape through it. It'd keep them dry, but it would let the heat out. And the sand floors, that was by design. They were much more comfortable. Of course, they had no beds. They had no anything. And the laying on the sand was much more comfortable than anything else. And as the week went on, I learned more and more about the Gilbertese. And then the last morning, the head guide had some particular flats that he wanted us to fish, and but we had to be back early to get packed up and ready to go because we left early the next morning. So our marching orders were to be on the beach at 6 instead of at 7. And we showed up at 6, and it was still a little bit too dark. Those flats out there are shallow. I mean, they're ankle deep, and they're just these little channels, and we'd get through. A guy'd be laying out on the bow of the boat, and he'd be signaling to the motorman, and that's how we'd get out. So we had to wait for it to get a little bit lighter, and whilst we were standing there waiting, a lady came out of a grove of palm trees down the beach from us, and she just walked out across the beach, and she went in and took her morning bath and the ocean, and she came back out and wrapped up in her little sarong again and went back into the grove of palm trees. And I thought, how peaceful, how serene, uninhibited. She didn't care. And as we rode, it was a long ride out to the flats that day, where he wanted us to go. I thought, the people here, they have no hypertension. Nobody there has high blood pressure. They have no of the symptoms that we get with stress in our lives. And Lisa and Linda could address this a lot better, but they didn't have any of the things that we often do. There was no jaw pain, no grinding of teeth. That was mine, always grinding my teeth. And what struck me, they had no word in their language for indigestion. They didn't even know what that was. And as I sat there and I thought about that young lady going out and taking her bath, I began to wonder, who are the poor ones? Maybe they're much more wealthy than I thought, and maybe I'm a lot more poor than I thought. So that's how I got the title of my talk today, Who Are the Poor? Our theme for this month is compassion. And today I have two major points. First, I'm going to talk about the Beatitudes, and then I'm going to talk about how we use the science of mind in our daily practices. So first of all, the Beatitudes. that's the first thing that came to my mind. When I thought of this idea of compassion, I thought of the Beatitudes. And I don't know how many of you know much about the Bible, but the Beatitudes were delivered by Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount, and that's where all of the blessed are these. Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. And where I kind of went with that was the first Beatitude, and that is... and it depends on where you read it, more about that. But blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. I knew enough not to get up in front of you guys and start spouting something unless I knew what I was talking about. So I checked it out, and that's about what it says. But it's also repeated, that's according to Matthew. It's also repeated in the book of Luke. Only in Luke, they leave out the in spirit. Blessed are those, blessed are the poor, for they shall inhabit the kingdom of heaven. And then finally, not in a canonized gospel, but in the Gnostic gospel of Thomas, it also says exactly what it does in Luke, which is, blessed are the poor, for they shall inhabit the heaven. Wanted to make sure, so I always go over to the 5 Gospels. I learned about that from Mark Wogemuth. Fantastic collection, and this is a group of 200 biblical scholars who have devoted their life to studying the Bible, specifically the sayings of Jesus within the Bible. And these 200 scholars, and these are the guys that speak Aramaic, they write Hebrew, they write Greek, and they can do their own translations. They don't have to depend on someone else's translations from ancient languages, and they draw their own conclusions. And then the 200 of them vote on everything that's in the canonized Bibles and other scriptures as to whether or not this is really what Jesus said. And it's really interesting things, and they back it up with facts. I mean, these are really well written. The 5 Gospels is an amazing book. So I checked these in the 5 Gospels, and the Matthew version, which most of us know, made it in pink. And the way they're coded is if these 200 scholars all agreed almost unanimously, there's consensus that, yes, this is exactly what Jesus said, then it was in red. If we think Jesus said something very much like that or something very close to this, it's in pink. If it's, we don't know, it's just like in regular type. If it's, there's no way he said that, it's in bold black. So the Matthew version was in pink. So I hurried back and went to Luke. Bingo, it's in red. But these guys didn't depend on everybody else's translations. And they, through consensus, all 200 of these felt that this blessed are the poor was not a good translation. That a more accurate reflection in today's terminology of what they were expressing at that time was, congratulations to the poor, for they experience the kingdom of heaven. Congratulations to the poor, for they shall experience the kingdom of heaven. So I went back to the book of Thomas and checked that. Bingo, he's in red too. These 200 renowned scholars are absolutely certain that this is exactly what Jesus said. So what this is saying, if maybe I'm the one that's poor, maybe I should be congratulated because I am experiencing the kingdom of heaven. Maybe all of us that are poor are experiencing the kingdom of heaven. So the compassion that we normally have for one another, the compassion that I had for the Gilbertese people when I landed in Christmas Island, maybe I can take that compassion and have compassion for myself. Maybe I can congratulate myself. And how we do that is by using the principles that we have, by using the things that we do, by prayer, meditation, visioning, all of the spiritual practices that we have can actually put them into practice. And this is one of the things that's so magnificent about this practitioner one group, and that's why I wanted this to come out the way it did today, is because they're not just reading about it. They're not just studying about it. They don't just have it academically or in their head. It's driven down to their heart. Sex is 1 week. Now, it's a big week in practitioner training. We have 1 week on sex. They spent 3 weeks on sex. Drugs, 1 week. They spent 2 weeks on drugs. Death and dying. That's 2 weeks in the curriculum. They spent 4 weeks on death and dying. And that's why it's taken them 15 months to do it. But they've delved in and they've got in and done that. And what my point is in all this is they are actually absolutely experiencing it. They're using the tools. They don't just hold them in their head. They've got them in their heart. And they're actually using these tools. And instead of just getting up and doing the usual talk about prayer and meditation and visioning and of all of our spiritual practices, the law of circulation and everything else, I've broken these up a little bit differently, and I've put them in a way that is the same, the different way to look at all of this. And so what I'm going to talk about is communion with God, misperception, our purpose here on life, and non-resistance. First of all, communion with God. Ernest Holmes wrote, "The secret of spiritual power lies in consciousness of one's union with the whole." That's a capital W, meaning the divine or God. "And the availability of good, capital G. God is accessible to all people." I know that I never really felt like I had any kind of a divine connection. I thought that communion with the divine, communion with God involved a burning bush that didn't consume itself. I've never seen that. And or this big James Earl Jones voice booming out of the sky. Never heard that. But what I've come to realize is that the communion with the divine is in our everyday lives. The communion with the divine is us. It's what we do. It's how we are. It's us as people. Little example. There is a police constable in Hampshire, England, by the name of Rob Thomas. And he got a call from a fellow constable who started to kid him, give him a hard time about this new Lego figure that was out. And he didn't know anything about Legos, but this new Lego figure that was out was of a constable, a British constable, and it looked just like Rob Thomas. And they were kidding him about it. So he came into work a few days later, and there was the little Lego figure of Rob Thomas. And I think we have a picture of, maybe we don't. Somewhere we do. Uh-oh. Maybe Mrs. Fleming didn't put it in.
Oh, sure, blame her. She's not in the room.
I'm going to tell Mom.
Use your imagination, and here's this Lego figure that looks just like this constable. So as he looked at that, he got to looking at it closer and closer, and he looked down at the little badge on the little Lego figure, and he got out his magnifying glass and looked down at this little badge on it, and there the number on the little badge on this Lego figure was badge number 1337. The same badge number that he'd been wearing for over 20 years. These are the fingerprints of the divine that are all over our lives. Coincidence? I don't know, maybe. But to look just like him, and they do, they look so much alike. Now, Rob himself, his mustache is a little gray, but the other one, it's just like him. And it sometimes does come out in not necessarily so serious. It can actually be in the realm of humor. And I am reminded of the story of one of my colleagues was sent to an area of the country where a lot of people were getting the magazine and they had no center. So his job was to go start a center. And he got a meeting place and started doing, and in order to get people to attend, he was going door to door, knocking on doors and inviting people to come to the center on Sunday. And he came to one house and knocked on the door, and could tell somebody was home, but nobody would come to the door. Nobody came to the door. So he took out his business card, and on the back of it, he thought it'd be cute to write a scripture reference. And so he wrote Revelations 3:20 and stuck it in the door and left. Well, that Sunday came, and he was, after service, he was introducing himself to the people there and greeting them. And this one lady came up, and she handed him a card, and he looked down, and it was his own card. And he looked down, he turned it over, and there in the back, Revelations, his writing, 3:20. Then written below it was Genesis 3:10. We couldn't wait to get home and look up Genesis 3:10. He knew what the revelation was. The revelation said, "Behold, I knock at the door, and if someone answers, I will enter." But he wanted to see what Genesis was, so he couldn't wait to get home. He flopped over, he opened over to Genesis 3:10, and it said, "I heard you speak, but I was afraid, for I was naked." No wonder she didn't come to the door. Communion with God. Point number 2, misperception. We live in a universe of infinite possibilities. I talk about that many, many times up here. We live in this sea of infinite possibilities. We're restrained from experiencing our own good by our own thinking, our own perceptions, or our misperceptions, and our own beliefs. Our spiritual practices of that are meditation and journaling. In the Prac 2 class last week, somebody brought up the idea, well, if we can do all this, why can't we regenerate limbs? If we've lost a limb, why can't we do that? And we decided that maybe we can. That the thing that's limiting us is our belief that you can't regenerate a limb. And maybe the day will come when we can get rid of that belief and we can accept the new belief that we can regenerate a limb. We know that most of the cells in our body are replaced regularly. I think long after that class, I opened up and read something. We get a whole new skeleton every 5 years. So why couldn't we regenerate a limb?
My skeleton needs to step up.
I don't think you whispered that.
It's okay, we are all.
Ernest Holmes wrote, "If we were dealing directly with disease, poverty, or unhappiness, he would be caught in its mental vibration. We should seek to disentangle our imagination from the material man and let it join with our contemplation of the spiritual man." So take our eye off the condition and look to the spiritual or higher truth. Our third thing is our purpose. What is our purpose? Our earthly purpose is to be God in expression. Our big job is to allow the divine to go through us, experience this thing we call life through us. The feeling that you hold when you hold a newborn baby, or when a puppy licks your face, or when you connect with that special someone. Allow yourself to love. This is God in expression. But it's not only for that special someone, it's also for someone that you experience as other. Someone that maybe has a different political belief, or has a different cultural background, or have different habits or different ways of being in the world. When we can see beyond that and have that same feeling of the puppy licking our face as we do for that person that we see as other, then we will have embraced the divine. Fourth point is non-resistance. It is here that the mentality performs seeming miracles, because there is nothing to hinder the whole, once again capital W, from coming through. It is here that the mentality performs seeming miracles, because there is nothing to hinder the whole from coming through. It is the understanding that all things are working together, conspiring for our own good, even when it doesn't look that way. There's a man by the name of Conrad Selly of Bloomington, Indiana. He had a nephew who had, I think it was leukemia. He was in France and had taken a sudden turn for the worse. And it didn't look like he was going to be around long. And Conrad so much wanted to go visit him before he passed away, or in order to give him support through this. But a trip overseas is expensive, and that was out of Conrad's budget. But he was driving home, and he got this strong urge to pull in and buy a lottery ticket. And he thought, that's silly, that's odds of that are horrible. But it kept pulling him, and sure enough, he pulled in, he went in, and he bought a $20 lottery ticket. The next morning, he found out that he had won $10,000, a 4,000 to 1 chance. It's when we give the divine an opportunity to work through us. Now, I'm not advising everybody to run out and buy lottery tickets or start gambling all of a sudden. But it's when we shut ourselves down, when we stop listening to the still small voice, when we ignore those urges, when we ignore the opportunities that we have because, oh, that'll never work. I can never do that. We have that negative self-talk. We have all of the other good reasons we shouldn't do it. We're putting constraints on the divine. The conclusion for today. The science of mind is our way to successfully navigate the human condition. But it doesn't serve us very well if we don't use it. Begin by applying the truths of the science of mind and spirit to life as you see it, and know that as you apply these teachings, everything in your experience changes. Ask the Prac 2 students. The concept of rich or poor separates us from one another, and separates us from God. Any sense of poverty is a lack of knowledge of the presence of God. And so it is with our awareness of that infinite presence that is continually and continuously expressing itself through us, with compassion, that I invite my colleagues, the practitioners, to join me in surrounding our congregation in love and light. And just simply know that as we go through this thing called life, that there is a power in the universe, and it is for us. It is with us. It is expressing through and as us. And as we allow that divine force, that creative, magnificent, infinite intelligence and force, that our lives can be better. Our lives are made instantly better. And so I speak my word for anyone who is experiencing health challenges in any way, including those, and specifically those who are experiencing this thing that we have called cancer, particularly this thing that we call brain cancer. For what we know is that within each and every cell within our body, there is an intelligence. At the cellular level, at the subcellular level, at the atomic level, and even at the subatomic level, there is an intelligence which knows how that cell is supposed to divide, how it is supposed to construct, how it is supposed to be, and we call forth that perfect division of cells. We call forth the elimination, the stepping over, and the avoidance of any type of cancer. We speak by our word now for anyone who is experiencing this thing that we call a broken bone. We don't deny that there is a broken bone, but what we do know is that the very power which made all of the universe certainly has within its capacity and capability to heal, to facilitate a healing of any and every bone. And we just call forth that magnificent healing now. For that healing is absolutely taking place right now. And I also speak my word for those who are experiencing the outer effects of bumps and bruises and gouged eyes and cuts and contusions and swelling, that same infinite intelligence is operating through a magnificent healing of all types of injuries. And so we just give thanks. We give thanks for the health that is behind all that is. I also speak my word for those who are experiencing lack and limitation. We just simply know that we live in an abundant universe. We don't need windows, we don't need beds, we don't need all of these trappings that we have in this world. For we can have the island breezes. We can have the soft sand. We can have a life free of hypertension. And I speak my word for those who are feeling that separation from one another and separation from God. Just simply know that as individualized expressions of God, each and every one of us are beings of love. For God is love, and we are God. And so we just give thanks. We give thanks for the love of God. We give thanks for prosperity and abundance. And we give thanks for the healing that is taking place right now. And so it's with that gratitude that I release these words to a working of law which always responds. And so it is.